Okay, in these 2-minute quick sketches, we're going to be looking for just line art. So that means we're going to be working towards the more complicated contours of the pose. We'll start with the pillow shape or the core, something that resembles the pillow shape, keeping the arms and the legs simple cylinders to start off with, finding the feet on the ground plane, getting the arm cylinders in with the correct flexion line, something that represents the hand, and then where the head and the neck are. I usually put the head and the neck in towards the end, typically when I do this kind of construction method, because I'm looking more for the gravity of the body first, and then I'll put the head in afterwards, especially on a more dynamic pose. Now I'm looking for the center line of the figure, so I can balance out the left side from the right side. And then the landmarks, looking for the great trochanters, somewhere where the rib cage is, the other scapula, or an indication of the other scapula. And as I find these new landmarks over the top of the construction lines, I solidify them by darkening them in. This prevents me from doing anything else, but in trying to stay away from other things like rendering or getting caught up in a detail somewhere. What I'm really trying to do is just map things out and get as far as I can with the entire drawing. So on top of the cylinders now, or those two tapering lines that represent the axioskeletal part of the figure, the arms and the legs, I'm placing rhythms over the top of it that represent muscle groups. At the same time, if I need to repurpose a proportion, then I'm also going to do that. Like in the case of these ankles here, they're a little bit on the thin side, so I'm bulking them up a little bit more. In this second drawing, we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be looking just for the complex pose. And in this case, it's more complicated because both arms are going to be swinging back behind the figure, which means that there's all those complex rhythms in both shoulders. So first the core, then the rhythms of the limbs, or how the limbs connect to the body. Then I'm looking for the rib cage and the pelvis, or an indication of the area that I'm going to be spending most time on, which in this case is going to be the rib cage. The landmarks, filling out all of the different volumes. Here I'm looking for the base of the scapulas, or where the scapulas will come to an end on the back of the rib cage. And then the rest of the axioskeletal portion of the body, the arms all the way out to the hands. And you want to put the hands and the feet in because it's difficult to measure proportions unless you have all parts of the body placed within the picture space. That's why you don't want to crop a figure. That's why you don't want to work on just a small portion of it unless you're dealing with anatomy. And that's a part of when we deal with motivations. And I'll have a video on different quick sketch motivations as well. That's going to be a really important one. Now that we have the balance point in, we can go back up and we can solve the problem of those scapulas. So dealing with them, I'm going to first start by using the inside edges of the spines of the scapula, and I'm going to build a spiral from the inside edge all the way out to the shoulder, back around across the skin, and depending upon how far the arm is back, you'll see 2 or 3 folds. And what those lines indicate are the fold lines of the skin on the back, where you're going to have the rippling of the skin, or where shadow patterns are going to occur. On this third drawing, we're going to start working towards shadow patterns, but with this one I'm going to build the shadow pattern out. I'm not going to shade it during the 2-minute session. It's so I have a little more time spent on finding things in the figure, because again, 2 minutes isn't very long. But if you have enough of a motivation and you have a fairly confident hand in putting lines down, you don't scratch them in like I'm trying not to here, then you can get quite a lot done in 30 seconds all the way up to however long you need to draw. And in these 2-minute drawings, I'm looking for the entire pose, which is the motivation with every quick sketch, unless you're looking for, say, an anatomical nuance or a likeness in a short period of time. Then you have to spend your time elsewhere. But in this case, I'm looking for the entire pose all the way through within the gesture, and in this particular sketch, I'm going to look for the shadow pattern. It is a complicated pose, enough as it is, to solve all the problems here. If I have any time left, I'm going to try to map out whatever shadows I can get. And then later on, after the pose, I'm going to shade everything in. But I'm not going to spend my time within the drawing time building the shadow pattern or shading the shadow patterns. I'm just going to be building things because, as you can see, along the edge of the figure there's the scapula, there's the serratus muscles, there's the obliques, there's the hip flexor, and all of those things have their own shadow pattern to them, which means you have to spend some time building each nuance. You'll also notice that when I put the shadow patterns in, I'm putting them in a convex rather than concave fashion. And the convex means towards the light source because the body doesn't have any concave spaces in it. I'm trying to make everything feel as full as possible. So now when you get enough of the pattern done in the drawing, then come back to it later and shade it in like this. Here's the drawing after the fact. Just filling everything out, and that's all. Alright, in this particular pose, we have an abstract position that the model is in. He's really compressed down into a ball. So I start with an abstract shape. It kind of goes hand in hand with the pose. And by having that abstract shape, I can solve problems a lot quicker if I don't go all the way through the figure, but I use this abstract shape as the basis for the contour of the figure, or the way we see the figure outlined in space. And what I'm doing here is I'm appending all the extremities, or the pieces that are hanging off of that first circle that are the arms and the legs, the hands and the feet, and adding those just as simple shapes to the circle where they might go within their proportions, or hopefully keeping all of the proportions sound. And then I go to work looking for the shadow pattern with whatever time I have left. And in this case, the arms have a shadow pattern on them, but the more complex space is the torso, so I begin there, where I know I'm going to have to solve a lot of undulations, and then I'll go out towards the simpler shapes afterwards, and I'm only looking for the edge where the light and the dark meet. If I do anything else, I'm going to be slowing myself down from not being able to fulfill all of the different nuances that I'm trying to achieve in this 2-minute period of time. So now the arm is a simpler space. The only area that has a lot of complexity to it is the scapular area. As well, the elbow has a little bit to it, but we can avoid the elbow by going around it, which is exactly what the shadow pattern does. There's a little tiny hook in there for the ridge muscles, but I'm not concerned with that as much because that's just a detail. I'm more concerned with getting the bigger patterns in and then trying to make them as graphic as possible, regardless of the light source that you have on your model. We're trying to push those darks a little bit darker, and that'll make the picture more complete looking. In this particular drawing, I'm looking again for the shadow patterns. So in this pose, the model's standing upright. The pose is a bit easier to solve, and the hands, they make a gesture that's sort of like a circular shape to go all the way up and over. She's reaching both hands up and holding them above her head. So in this, I'm not going to solve the arms necessarily because the back is a really complicated space with all of its shadow patterns, and I'm going to spend more time in that particular area. But first, the contour around the forms that I'm going to be shading. Looking for the overlap of the two legs. And I'm putting the muscle structure on top of the cylinder forms that I've already found, and then I'll go after the shadow patterns by finding the core or the terminator where the light and the dark meet, and then shade everything in after that. Now, as we kind of wind down here on this last quick sketch, I just want to kind of point out that with quick sketching like this, the reason this is easy to do, or easier looking than not, is because I'm kind of using long drawing techniques to help me here solve the problems, and I'm consolidating them down into what's important for the moment in time. And if we just draw quick sketches without having any long form practice, then things won't be as well controlled, because I am using a lot of motivation by anatomy, by long-term drawing and rendering and knowing what proportions are, knowing how to shade and control the pencil. And if I only did quick sketching in very short-term increments, 2s, 3s, and 5s, maybe 10s and 20s every now and again, I wouldn't have enough time to practice these long-term skill sets, and I would only hope to achieve some of the things that I can achieve in these shorter-term drawings, and it really does come from having those longer drawings to practice from.